Home buyers are finally gaining control in many parts of the housing market. In some areas, sellers are finally waking up to reality and slashing prices. The shift is real, and it's happening quicker than most people realize. Zillow just updated their heat map index, and the changes are eye-opening. Hey, if you're new to my channel, welcome. My name is Jason Ferrier. I've been a realtor and investor in Central Ohio. And today we're talking about which housing markets across the country are buyers markets and which ones are sellers markets. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you enjoy it. Now, I left the link for the heat map in the description below to both Zillow's website and the Resi Club article that we're gonna use. So go ahead and follow along with me as we look through the Zillow heat map today, and let me know, do you trust Zillow's heat map? Does it make sense to you based on where you live and how they rate your housing market? Let me know in the comments below. To help us understand the Zillow Heat Index, we're gonna lean on Resi Club Analytics. And today I'm actually in Mount Vernon, Ohio. Now, Mount Vernon's about 50 minutes or so outside of Columbus, Ohio, and it's definitely a growing real estate market. Home prices in this little town of maybe 40, 50,000 people, they are up substantially over the last 5 years. And I do own some rental properties in this town. I've actually flipped a couple homes here as well. And I'm a pretty active realtor in this town, so I know it well. I'm gonna keep showing these small Ohio towns on my videos. Now to the article. Zillow economists have an economic model known as the Zillow Market Heat Index to gauge the competitiveness of the housing markets across the country. This model looks at key indicators, including home price changes, inventory levels, and days on market to generate a score showing whether the market favors buyers or sellers. A higher score indicates more of a seller's market. A lower score indicates a buyer's market. And you can see their ratings on how they do it with the numbers. According to the Zillow Heat Index, the rating for the US is now a 55, and that's out of 100. You can see back in April of 2022, the market overall in the US was like near a 90. So in other words, sellers had all the control. But then it dipped substantially and then kind of flowed up and down depending on seasonality. But you can tell that trend is kind of trending lower over the past few years. And now that number is 55 out of 100, not 90. But like Resi Club points out in the article, it varies greatly by market. Hey, quick break from today's video reminding you, subscribe to The Housing Nerd and give me a thumbs up. I'll keep bringing the value. You just have to comment and give me the thumbs up. Oh, and subscribe too. So most of the hot markets, as you can see there on the screen, are in the Northeast. There's one in the Midwest in Michigan. Then you've got Anchorage, Alaska. But every market is different in real estate, obviously. And I think this article and this analysis really shows you that. Then they show you the coldest markets where buyers have more power. And that should come as no surprise either. That's mostly in the Gulf, in the Sun Belt states, right? Texas, Louisiana, Florida. Those markets are really experiencing the most buyer power when it comes to where they've gained the most leverage with real estate negotiations. So comment below so far. I want to know, what do you think of Zillow's ratings on the hottest and coldest markets? To demonstrate just how much the heat index varies across housing markets, let's zoom into the actual map and look at some of these markets across the US. Columbus, you can see back in 2018, it was rated as a 64. That means that sellers are in control. But then it shot up rapidly, all the way up to 104 in April of 2021. But then it fell, and now it's a 65. And I would actually agree with this. Sellers definitely still have control in the market here in Central Ohio, in the Columbus market overall. And remember, I'm here in Mount Vernon, Ohio, but we're only 50 minutes or so, about 40 miles from Columbus. So from an accuracy standpoint, that seems to be pretty accurate. I wanted to take you down this street to show you this building. This building here used to be a high school in Mount Vernon, and then it was abandoned for years, and then they just turned it into luxury apartments. They've put a ton of money into this building, a ton. And you can see on your screen the type of apartments that are in there. Now, I wouldn't exactly call these apartments affordable, but they definitely add to the rental, inventory in the area. All right, now let's take a look at another city. Let's go to Chicago, Illinois. So you can see in Chicago, 2018, market heat index said it was a 52, so basically a neutral market. Then a 53, then a 58, then it actually peaked at 76. So you had Columbus over 100, and so that means basically sellers had all the power, to Chicago, where sellers certainly had power, but it wasn't completely overwhelming. This is a market and an example where I think Zillow is incorrect, because the inventory in Chicago is very low right now, very low. And you'll talk to any local, anybody, a lot of people comment on my channel from Chicago and they say, man, we can't find anything. Like, anything that is put on the market is snatched up. It's a very tight market. So I want to say probably that heat index could be wrong for Chicago, but comment below and tell me what you think, especially if you're from Chicago. Next is Washington, D.C. Everybody likes to talk about Washington, D.C. right now because of everything that's been going on with the cuts to the government workers and, all the hoopla around that. So Washington, D.C. was a 57 in 2018, then climbed to an 82, and now it's dropped to a 69. Inventory has been going up substantially there. And so I think this is probably a little high, a little bullish. It probably, Zillow may be giving the sellers too much credit in Washington, D.C. Tell me what you think. All right, the other reason I wanted to go down the street, beyond showing you this renovated high school, is to show you another building that I happen to own. And when I bought this building, the school was completely vacant and it was completely tore up. So I bought that place several years ago, and it's a triplex. It's 3 units. So my units in that building are nothing like the ones in this renovated schoolhouse. I mean, the renovated schoolhouse has pretty much top of the line finishes, and the rents reflect that. But that's not really the market I'm trying to serve. I'm trying to serve a market that needs a less expensive place to live, basically. And so I keep my rents definitely lower. Now look at New York City. 56 back in 2018. Then it started to decline for a couple of years as far as the index goes, but it stayed in the 80s. And then instead of really falling off the cliff, like going down into the 60s like Columbus did, it's actually now still in the 80s. By the way, sometimes walking the streets is the best way to find an opportunity, because you meet people and you can kind of get a sense of what buildings are like when they're up close without really disturbing anybody. Like this building right here. I tried to buy this one too at one point. Ended up not working out because the building needed a lot more work than I was willing to put into it for the money, but I tried to buy that one. I tried to buy a lot of them here in Mount Vernon. But tell me what you think about the New York rating. I mean, people are on this channel from New York City all the time, and they tell me the market's super tight, very difficult to find an opportunity that makes sense, both investors and home buyers. Now, if you got millions of dollars, no problem probably. But if you're like an average home buyer or an average investor like me, big problem. All right, now let's head down the coast and look at Charlotte. Got a lot of people on the channel who want to know about Charlotte, North Carolina. You can see in 2018, it was a 57. So again, pretty much nearing that neutral balance market, and then peaked at 86 and then fell all the way down to 62. So what's interesting is Zillow has Columbus at a 65 and they've got Charlotte at a 62. I think the rating for Charlotte may be a little high because of all the new construction, but you tell me, especially if you're from Charlotte or any of these areas, tell me if the Zillow heat map and heat index, if they match what you're seeing there locally. All right, now let's pause the Zillow heat map for a second, because I want to show you something real, not just on a chart. And check this out. This home was a foreclosure, beaten up, forgotten about, basically left for dead at one point. And while some YouTubers claim that there are 15 million vacant homes throughout the US, like the one behind me used to be, they're not move-in ready. It's not one you're just gonna pull a U-Haul truck up to and move your stuff into. This home would not be a home anyone would want to move into until an investor stepped in, bought the house from foreclosure, and put a lot of money and work into it. It's repaired, it's cleaned up, and now it's gonna be sold. In fact, I'm the listing agent on this property. It's ready to close with the new owners, and they're excited. They're excited to have a house that they can be proud of and a house that meets their budget. And get this, it's priced under $200,000. And forget being just an investor. If you're just someone looking for a house to buy for you and your family, one you can actually live in, this type of opportunity does exist out there. Now, depending on where you live, the price points could be much more than 200 grand, maybe even less than 200 grand. But the point is, these opportunities do exist. So in my opinion, properties like this represent the true American dream. But anyway, since I was in Mount Vernon doing my walk and talk on this Zillow article, I thought, let's show you this house. I think it's a pretty good example of what can be accomplished if you go out there and do the work needed to find properties like this and then bring them back to life. We don't need a ton of new building necessarily when there's a lot of houses like this ready to be revitalized. Comment below and tell me what you think. All right, let's get back to the Zillow heat map. Next on the list is Tampa, Florida. It started at an 80 in 2018 and then peaked at 77. It didn't peak at the number that a lot of other metros peaked at, which is surprising from Zillow because I would think back during the craze in 2021-22, there was basically a completely strong ironclad seller's market, but maybe not. But in any case, it's fallen all the way to a 43. So that, according to Zillow, is a buyer's market. It's underneath 50. Okay, next stop is Houston, Texas. April 2018. 52. Then it peaked in 2021 and 22 at 75. Definitely a seller's market at that point. But again, not like, Columbus or even New York City where it was in the 80s or even 100. Now it stands at a 50, which is basically a neutral market approaching an actual buyer's market. Then we head out to La La Land, Los Angeles. Back in 2018, it was a 67, then peaked all the way up to a 98, where basically sellers had an ironclad lock on the market. Then it's fallen to a 65. This building in front of me here on this corner, I'm gonna show it to you. This was a big one, and it looks like they're going through a renovation right now, but I was like that close to snagging this one. That close, but it's big and it needed a roof. It was hard for me to really pin down the rehab cost that I would get into by buying this. It's a commercial building and that was kind of out of my scope too. So I was very conservative with my offer. Didn't win the deal, but nonetheless, it did sell. And looking back, hindsight's 2020, should I paid what it went for? Maybe. That's the building right there. And I think it was like, at that point, I want to say they wanted like $350 for it or so. Last on our list is Denver, Colorado. April 2018, Zillow has them rated at a 72. Then you can see it went all the way up to 98. So I find that puzzling, right? Like Denver was a 98, Houston only got up to a 75, and Tampa only got up to a 77. And now Denver is a 57. Now we're going to go back to the article because Resi Club does a great job at kind of summarizing what we just looked at on the map. So they say, directionally, there's a lot that Zillow gets right. We believe Zillow has correctly identified many regional housing markets where buyers have gained the most leverage, particularly around the Gulf. It also highlights areas where sellers have maintained, relatively speaking, some degree of control, including large portions of the Northeast and Midwest. I agree with Lance and Resi Club on this. I think Zillow got that right. But again, comment, let me know what you think. Number two, Zillow is slightly overstating Northeast and Midwest tightness. I'd also agree there. While there are still some relatively competitive pockets in those regions, Zillow's model appears to exaggerate the strength of seller conditions. In the real world, many of these markets feel more neutral or slightly tilted towards sellers, not full-blown, strong sellers markets as the model suggests. Then they say Zillow is also overstating seller strength on the West Coast. Conditions on the West Coast have clearly softened over the past year, and Zillow's model doesn't fully reflect that shift. Would also agree there. I think when you look at a market, I guess that's not the West Coast, but you look at Denver and they have exploding inventory. So it's still kind of rated as a neutral market. It should probably be a somewhat, definitely like a solid buyer's market, I would think, but you tell me. The softest housing markets right now, no surprise, those are Southwest Florida and Central Texas. Based on my personal housing market analysis, says Resi Club, Florida in particular, Southwest Florida, currently stands out as the softest region in the country, followed by Central Texas, markets such as Austin and San Antonio. We've got a viewer on our channel, I'm not gonna call him out, but I do feel bad for him because they've been trying to sell their townhome in San Antonio for a while now. It seems like they have it priced competitively, but they can't sell it. Why? Because there's a bunch of inventory there, right? And that's gonna create a soft market and give buyers more power. So this town square is pretty cool. It actually is literally right in the middle of town, and then there's a little roundabout that goes obviously around the square, but yeah, just kind of a cool little spot to hang out and a lot of history here in town. Yeah, I really like Mount Vernon. I'm sure you can tell that. And that's why I've invested here. I'll probably continue to invest here. In fact, this is where I own my Airbnb. I'm very successful with that Airbnb because I rent to nurses, traveling professionals, because there's a college here in town, a small college, actually a couple colleges. There's a hospital here, and quite frankly, there's not a lot of hotels in the area. Now this building behind me I'd shown you earlier, and it was one that I tried to buy. And the reason why I tried to buy it was because of what's going on across the street. This building right here used to be a factory. Actually, I believe it was a Siemens factory. But when manufacturing went away in the US like that, sad situation, right? Well, and that building became abandoned, as many other buildings did too across the US, right? Especially here in the Rust Belt. But the city of Mount Vernon decided, let's convert it to something usable. So they put it up for sale, and I think they're getting ready to start the actual development, or they've already started kind of the outside of it. But I had an idea it was coming because I had talked to some local officials and figured out, hey, this development's coming. And then I saw that building across the street and thought, shoot, let me try to buy that, because I bought that one across the street from the high school when I knew it was going to be turned into luxury apartments. So in summary, it's obvious that different markets have different ratings on Zillow's heat index, right? But at the end of the day, you got to get super local. But this gives you some type of idea of maybe where the softness is in the market. And if you're in one of the soft areas, could be a good idea to make some disrespectful offers, right? See if you can get even a better deal and turn it into an advantage for you as far as the softness in the local market. If you're in a market that they say is super tight, I wouldn't listen to them necessarily and take that for, gospel. I would go out there and test the market and make lowball offers, because regardless of what market it is right now, there is basically more inventory everywhere. And so more inventory equals better deals for you if you're a buyer. Now, if you really want to keep your finger on the pulse of the housing market, you should join myself and the fellow housing nerds on the Redfin Live video that I do every week. In fact, today's Thursday. I'm going to do one tomorrow on Friday. And I do it every week. It's a chance for us to get together, talk about the housing market, and I look at the details of many markets, many metros across the US. And you can join us, put in your metro, and I'm happy to analyze it on the live. Even if you want to complain about the housing market, you can do that too on the live. But check out the latest one right here.